Northanger Abbey is no one's favourite Jane Austen novel. The last time I made a statement like that about Sense and Sensibility, the comment section was not too happy about it. So let's add just a touch of nuance this time. Northanger Abbey is probably not your number one. It's not the novel you first think of when it comes to Jane Austen. It's not the novel you recommend to your friends who've never read a Jane Austen book. It's not the novel you bring up in conversation when you try to make a clever point about Jane Austen's writing. Out of the 6 novels we usually list as Jane Austen's canon, Northanger Abbey was the last to be published, together with Persuasion shortly after the author's death, but the first to be written. We think of it as her juvenile novel, kind of the opposite to Persuasion. Where Persuasion is considered refined, mature and clever, Northanger Abbey is seen as more simple, straightforward and a bit rough around the edges. All of this is fair enough. It isn't as intricately plotted as Pride and Prejudice, or as satirical as Emma, or as introspective as Mansfield Park, but it still deserves more hype than it gets. Psst, I said the title of the video. That's how you know we're getting serious. Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and let's just get right to it. Wait, no, let's sound the spoiler alert first, so you know what's coming. I mean, it's a discussion on Northanger Abbey, that's what's coming. If you haven't read the book, you might want to skip this video. The reason why Northanger Abbey usually ends up in the bottom half of people's personal Jane Austen novel rankings is, I think, partly due to 2 major factors. The first one is Catherine Morland. She's the protagonist of Northanger Abbey, but as much as it pains me to say this as a Northanger Abbey apologist, she's a bit bland, isn't she? Her main personality traits are being naive and reading books. And while reading books isn't a bad personality trait to have as the main character in a book, Catherine does feel a bit flat compared to some of the other young ladies in Jane Austen's Disney princess lineup. There's Elizabeth Bennet, the snarky one, or Emma Woodhouse, the smart but arrogant one, or Marianne Dashwood, the unconventional one. Catherine Morland doesn't have the tragic depth of Anne Elliot or the thoughtful nature of Fanny Price. She stumbles through the world a wide-eyed ingenue through and through. Her default mode is confused, her gullibility level is 100%, she doesn't know who to believe and who to trust, and how to say no to people, which is a perfect fit for the story, don't get me wrong. Her innocence is exactly what makes her discovery of Bath society such a delight for us readers. It's also what makes us and Henry Tilney forgive her for her many blunders in the second half of the book when the story takes us to Northanger Abbey. Throughout the book, Catherine learns to say no, and she figures out who to trust and who her true friends are. This and Mansfield Park are the closest Jane Austen gave us to a modern coming-of-age story. It's a deliberate choice to create this very naive, sheltered character, pluck her out of her idyllic home in the countryside and put her among the vultures of society. But if we take Catherine Morland out of the novel and compare her to Jane Austen's other leading ladies, she does pale in comparison, which is a bit of a shame. The second reason I think Northanger Abbey isn't most people's favourite is because of its reputation as Jane Austen's Gothic fiction satire. This is almost the first thing people mention when Northanger Abbey is discussed. It's the satire of Georgian Gothic novels. The comparison is obvious, right? Everything from the title to the many references to Gothic fiction within the story, to the main character's own obsession with Gothic fiction. Everything about this screams Gothic novel satire. But the thing is, the real Gothic satire only really starts halfway through the book, when Catherine moves from Bath to Northanger Abbey. That's when we get the prestige of Gothic fiction tropes. So much of the humour in that section of the book comes from that. Catherine opening random storage chests and creepy old doors. The way she's so convinced that General Tilney is an evil wife murderer. There's plenty of Gothic fiction satire in Northanger Abbey, but it's all confined to that second half of the book. So if you go into Northanger Abbey expecting all this Gothic hilarity, you'll be disappointed when the first half of the book is all about a teenager figuring out how to socialize with grown-ups for the first time in her life. I personally prefer the Bath half to the Northanger Abbey half. I like the awkwardness of those parties. I like Catherine falling in with new friends. I adore the Thorpe siblings as small-scale villains in this novel. And of course, seeing her get close to the Tilneys. Plus, Mrs. Allen is an absolutely underrated matron-type character. Catherine goes to her for moral guidance and all she gets in return is fashion advice. I adore her. There's other elements missing in Northanger Abbey that we expect from a Jane Austen novel. The heroine's family barely features other than Catherine's brother James. We're used to the heroine's siblings and parents being a significant part of the story. The Bennet family in Pride and Prejudice is made up entirely of big characters whose interactions with each other and with the heroine are part of what makes it such a fun book. We've got controlling parents like Mr. Woodhouse from Emma or Sir Walter Elliot from Persuasion. We've got interesting sibling dynamics in Sense and Sensibility and to some degree in Mansfield Park with Fanny Price and the Bertrams. But in Northanger Abbey, Catherine is all by herself in the big city. She's got 9 siblings and 2 living parents, but with the exception of James, we don't see much of her family at all, other than at the very beginning and the very end of the book. Hang on, wasn't this supposed to be a video defending Northanger Abbey? Yeah, alright, we're getting to that. I just wanted to point out that if you don't vibe with it, that's fair enough. It's all very valid reasons. However, there is so much to love about Northanger Abbey. Let me count the ways. I'm sorry, this is now a meeting of the first official Henry Tilney fan club. The doors are locked, the phone lines have been cut. I'm afraid there's no escaping this hot priest. Alright, don't click out of the video yet. We'll keep this section brief. I actually made a whole separate video about Jane Austen's priests and why Henry Tilney is the best one, which you'll find linked down below. Henry Tilney actually cares about the things that Catherine Morland cares about, which is books. He's just as much of a Mrs. Ratcliffe fangirl as she is, and he's not ashamed about it. And that's major, because even young, naive Catherine learns very quickly that the men in this world don't read novels. This is very much confirmed when she asks John Thorpe about them. Have you ever read Udolpho, Mr. Thorpe? Udolpho? Oh Lord, not I. I never read novels. I have something else to do. Catherine, humbled and ashamed, was going to apologize for her question, but he prevented her by saying, "Novels are all full of nonsense and stuff. There has not been a tolerably decent one come out since Tom Jones, except The Monk. I read that the other day. But as for all the others, they are the stupidest things in creation." By the point she brings up this topic with Henry Tilney a few chapters later, she's already much more cautious about her own enthusiasm for Gothic fiction. "But you never read novels, I dare say." "Why not?" "Because they are not clever enough for you. Gentlemen read better books. The person, be it gentleman or lady, who has not pleasure in a good novel must be intolerably stupid. I have read all Mrs. Ratcliffe's works, and most of them with great pleasure. The Mysteries of Udolpho, when I had once begun it, I could not lay down again. I remember finishing it in 2 days, my hair standing on end the whole time." This last statement by Henry Tilney is quoted so many times out of context. You see it all over Jane Austen themed merchandise and Instagram posts, and it's always just attributed to Jane Austen. But it's worth noting that she's giving this line to Henry Tilney as a way to mark him out among the other young men of this novel. This is something that maybe gets lost across the 2 centuries that divide us from the publication of Northanger Abbey. The fact that reading novels and sensational, gory page-turners like Anne Radcliffe's works in particular was very much a women's hobby. Can you imagine Mr. "I'm too important for this" Darcy indulging in a good Gothic novel? Or Edmund Hold My Bible Bertram? The only other male character I can think of whose fondness for novels is a major part of his personality is Captain Benwick in Persuasion. And there it's pretty much presented as a symptom for his depression. Henry Tilney is unashamed about his love for novels or his knowledge of muslin and other questions of female dress. he's comfortable talking to women about things like that, not just his own sister, but also to complete strangers like Mrs. Allen. How can we not adore him? Though he is by no means a perfect Prince Charming. I always get the feeling that he likes being more clever than Catherine, more worldly. He likes explaining things to her and he enjoys her naivety a bit too much. He's also not as quick as I would have liked in protecting Catherine from his own father. He sees his place in the Tilney family as the peacekeeper, the son who's there to smooth things out for his sister, but he's not one to speak out against General Tilney. Not until the very end of the book. He has his own problems to overcome, his own character arc. And that's something Jane Austen does incredibly well in all of her books. Her men have to prove themselves just as much as the heroines. We see this with Darcy, with Knightley, with Edward Ferrars. I think with all of them actually. It's not the protagonist learning a lesson and then getting a man as a reward. It's both of them going through a transformation of character. Okay, I said I was going to keep the Henry Tilney section brief and clearly I lied. But let's move on to another character that makes Northanger Abbey truly stand out. It's Mr. Tilney. Sorry, I meant it's General Tilney. Daddy Tilney, if you like. He's one of the most interesting villains in all of Jane Austen's books, and he's villainous in a scarily realistic way. He's as nasty as Mrs. Norris and as scheming as Mrs. Ferrars, but as a man, he's much more powerful in a very tangible way. Lady Catherine from Pride and Prejudice is probably the closest we have to General Tilney when it comes to power and influence, as an aristocratic widow with her own fortune. And even she can't do more than throw a tantrum at Elizabeth Bennet once it becomes clear that Mr. Darcy has made up his mind about her. But General Tilney is the head of his family. Catherine is entirely at his mercy at Northanger Abbey. She wouldn't even have that invitation to Northanger Abbey if General Tilney wasn't trying to pimp out his younger son to someone he believes is a filthy rich heiress. When we see his children interact with him in his home, we get an idea of how controlling he is. Even Catherine, who, bless her, is not the most observational protagonist, even she's a bit scared of him, despite all the civilities he pays her while he's under the impression that she's absolutely loaded. Henry Tilney, who doesn't live at Northanger Abbey and has his own income, is so under his father's thumb that when the general throws Catherine out of his house in a fit of cruelty, he has to scramble to make things right. General Tilney is terrifying. There's not an ounce of comedy about him. We can't point and laugh. We can't revel in his downfall because there's nothing funny in how he treats Catherine, and there's no downfall. He behaves exactly like a man on a power trip behaves. Someone protected by wealth, privilege, and his position in society. Catherine wrongly thinks him a wife murderer, but by the time the mask comes off and we truly see how he treats her and his own children, it's not even that far-fetched. The Tilney family dynamic is truly fascinating, and we as the readers have to draw our own conclusions about it, because Catherine barely picks up on any of it. The same is true for the Thorpe family. John Thorpe is another one of those standout Jane Austen characters. He sort of fits into the category of a rakish young man with no sense for decorum or decency, where he sits alongside Frank Churchill and John Willoughby and Henry Crawford and the likes. But he's not quite the same. The more traditional Austen rake character in Northanger Abbey is actually Frederick Tilney, Henry's older brother. But he has his sights set on Isabella Thorpe, which is why we don't usually think of him like that. John Thorpe, on the other hand, has none of the finesse, none of the charisma required for the part he's trying to play in this story. He's hilarious. Every time he's on the page going on about carriages or horses or Lord knows what, I delight in his presence. The way he talks is so idiosyncratic, I can only imagine that he's heavily inspired by someone in Jane Austen's life who really pissed her off. He's the single biggest purveyor of comedy in Northanger Abbey. He's so hopeless at achieving his goal, which is marrying Catherine for her non-existent fortune, that even she can't bring herself to be even a little bit charmed by him. In John Thorpe, General Tilney and Henry Tilney, Jane Austen has written some truly outstanding men into this story. And I have been known to criticize her male character writing on several occasions, notably in Sense and Sensibility. But here she has crafted a romantic interest, a true villain, and a hilarious nuisance, and made them also delightfully individual and interesting, that it truly makes up for the aforementioned blandness in the creation of our heroine. And while we're on the craft of writing, my final point, yes, we're nearly at the end of this video, my final point in favour of Northanger Abbey is the writing style. It really stands out compared to Jane Austen's later works in that Jane Austen's voice is so loud and clear and front and centre in this book. Jane Austen herself is all over the narration. In particular, the much quoted rant about how people underestimate novels and novelists. It's such a delicious piece of writing in which Jane Austen complains about how characters in novels often hate novels, even though they're literally in a novel. And then she muses on the dismissal of novels in general, while other media such as journals and newspapers don't get the same hate. Although our productions have afforded more extensive and unaffected pleasure than those of any other literary corporation in the world, no species of composition has been so much decried. From pride, ignorance, or fashion, our foes are almost as many as our readers. And while the abilities of the 900th abridger of the history of England, or the man who collects and publishes in a volume some dozen lines of Milton, Pope and Prior, with a paper from the Spectator and a chapter from Sterne, are eulogized by 1,000 pens, there's almost a general wish of decrying the capacity and undervaluing the labour of the novelist, and of slighting the performances which have only genius, wit and taste to recommend them. She writes this bit as Jane Austen novelist. This is not said through the mouth of a character. This is her unfiltered voice. She's snarky and fed up, and I love this whole section. I really have to restrain myself and not just read out the entire rant, which does go on across several pages. But let me tell you, Northanger Abbey is worth reading for that bit alone. It's sections like this which make Northanger Abbey very meta. We're aware that we're reading a novel in which the main character lives her life through novels to a degree where she sees herself as the main character in a novel, which she quite literally is. Jane Austen's writing is so clever about that. And this self-awareness adds a whole other level of meaning that lifts this otherwise quite straightforward coming-of-age story onto a whole new level. Northanger Abbey is deceptive in its simplicity. You go into it expecting a Gothic fiction satire and find yourself in a young adult novel. But wait, actually it's also commentary on the novel as an art form itself and on the craft of storytelling. And throughout the whole book you've got Jane Austen right in your face, not holding back even a little. And if that hasn't made you reconsider Northanger Abbey, I'm afraid you cannot be helped. Thank you for watching. Bye.